The air in the marble stairwell was cold and dead, a stark contrast to the thrumming panic in Naomi Vance's chest. Each breath was a sharp, shallow thing, a fish gasping on dry land. Her tailored suit, a bespoke armor of charcoal gray wool that cost more than most people's rent, felt like a cage, its sharp lapels digging into her collarbones. Her hands, usually steady enough to sign billion-dollar contracts, trembled against the cool steel of the handrail. Down 17 floors she had fled, running from the silent judgment of her empty penthouse, from the ghost of her father's voice echoing in the board meeting replay in her head. Unacceptable, Naomi. Your projections are soft. Soft. The word was a weapon, honed over a lifetime of performance reviews that began in kindergarten. She slid down the wall, the fine fabric of her suit whispering against the painted concrete. Her elegant updo, a crown of natural hair styled with architectural precision, had come loose, tendrils clinging to her damp neck. She was the CEO of Vance Global, a titan of industry, a black woman who had shattered so many ceilings she'd lost count of the shards. But here, in the sterile silence of Stairwell B, she was just a woman unraveling. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting a sickly, greenish glow that made her deep brown skin look ashen. A single tear escaped, hot and traitorous, tracing a path through her meticulously applied foundation. It was in this moment of absolute private collapse that the fire door creaked open, and from that moment, everything changed. His name was Elias Cole, and his world was circumscribed by the walls of this very building. He was its superintendent, a man who spoke the language of pressure valves and circuit breakers. He was tall and broad-shouldered, a quiet strength in the set of his jaw. His brown skin was warm, a shade richer than hers, and his eyes, when they landed on her, held not surprise or judgment, but a deep, weary gentleness. He wore a simple gray work uniform, the building's logo embroidered over his heart, and his hands, calloused and capable, held a heavy-duty flashlight. He'd been investigating a flicker in the emergency lighting. He had not expected to find the penthouse queen crumpled on his territory. He didn't speak. He didn't move closer. He simply stood there, a bulwark of stillness in her storm. The silence stretched, broken only by her ragged breathing. He saw not the CEO, not the formidable Miss Vance, whose name was on the top-floor directory in gold leaf. He saw a person in pain. His kindness, the core of his being, was reflexive, an instinct honed by loss and fatherhood. He took a slow step forward, his work boots making a soft sound on the concrete. "It's okay," he said, his voice a low, calm rumble that seemed to absorb the frantic energy in the air. "You're safe." Naomi flinched, pulling her knees tighter to her chest, a primal instinct to make herself smaller. Humiliation washed over her, hot and suffocating. To be seen like this, weak, broken, a mess, was her greatest fear realized. She was a Vance. Vances did not break. They bent, they strategized, they conquered. They did not cry in stairwells. Elias set the flashlight down, its beam pointing at the ceiling. He unclipped a water bottle from his belt and knelt, not too close, but near enough to offer it. He held it out. "Here," he said. "Drink this." It was a gentle command, not a suggestion. Her eyes lifted from the floor and met his. For the first time, she truly saw him. She'd passed him in the lobby 100 times, a polite nod her only acknowledgement. Now, she saw the fatigue etched around his eyes, the quiet dignity in his posture. He was a man who understood burdens. Her hand was still shaking as she reached for the bottle. Her fingers brushed against his, and a jolt, warm and grounding, went through her. It was the first simple human touch she'd felt in what felt like years. That wasn't a perfunctory handshake. She drank, the cool water a balm to her raw throat. He remained kneeling, a silent guardian, giving her space to collect the shattered pieces of her composure. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't offer platitudes. He just stayed. And in the humming silence of that stairwell, his quiet presence was the most profound act of kindness she had ever known. For the first time in her adult life, someone had seen her in a moment of utter weakness and had not tried to fix her, leverage her, or recoil from her. They had simply offered her water. And for that, a second tear, and then a third, fell. Elias lived his life in the quiet rhythms of duty. His alarm went off at 5 a.m., a gentle chime that wouldn't wake his daughter. He'd rise in the pre-dawn dark of their small two-bedroom apartment on the ground floor, a part of his compensation as the building's live-in superintendent. The space was modest, but it was immaculate. Every surface was clean. Every object had its place. It was a home built on order and love, a sanctuary against the chaos of the world. In the kitchen, he moved with an economy of motion that was almost balletic, making coffee, packing a lunch for his daughter, Amara. The scent of toast and freshly brewed coffee filled the small space, a warm and comforting aroma. His daughter was the sun around which his world revolved. Amara was 6 years old, a tiny supernova of energy and questions. She emerged from her room at 6:30 on the dot, a whirlwind of bright pajamas and natural hair styled in beautiful twists that bounced with every step. Her eyes were wide and bright, missing nothing. "Daddy, did you know that monarch butterflies taste with their feet? Isn't that silly? Imagine tasting your pancakes with your feet." Her sentences were long, breathless streams of consciousness, full of tangents and non sequiturs that made perfect sense to her. He would smile, his tired face softening completely in her presence. "I did not know that, sweet pea. Now eat your pancakes with your mouth." He carried a quiet grief, a wound that had split his life in two. His wife, Sarah, had been taken by a sudden illness 3 years ago. Her photograph sat on the small mantelpiece in the living room, a beautiful black woman with a smile that could light up a city block. He never spoke of her in terms of loss, only in terms of love. "Mama used to love thunderstorms," he would tell Amara. "She said it was the sky making music." He kept her alive in these small daily acts of remembrance, channeling his pain into being the best father he could be. He was both mother and father, the one who kissed scraped knees, the one who checked for monsters under the bed, the one who patiently tried and failed to master French braids. His attempts always ended in a loving, lopsided puff, which Amara wore like a badge of honor. He had a life of scarcity, but an abundance of love. His hands, though calloused from work, were gentle. His heart, though wounded, was open. He was a man who knew how to fix broken things, from leaky faucets to perhaps broken people. 17 floors above Elias's warm, lived-in world, Naomi's penthouse was a monument to success and isolation. It was a palace of glass and steel, with panoramic views of the Philadelphia skyline. The furniture was minimalist and expensive, chosen by a designer to project an image of effortless power. There were no photographs on the walls, no stacks of well-loved books, no crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator. The air itself felt sterile, conditioned, lacking the scent of coffee or toast or life. Her mornings were as regimented as his, but silent. An espresso from a machine that cost $1,000, a protein bar eaten while standing and scrolling through market reports on her tablet. Her life was a series of targets to be met, expectations to be exceeded. The daughter of the legendary founder of Vance Global, she had spent her entire existence proving she was worthy of her name. Her father, even in retirement, was a constant presence, his calls a litany of critiques and veiled disappointments. She commanded boardrooms with an icy precision that had earned her the nickname the Iron Vance. She was brilliant, respected, and feared, and she was profoundly, achingly lonely. She had sacrificed everything for her career, friendships, hobbies, a fiancé who had loved her portfolio more than her person. She had built a fortress around her heart, believing vulnerability was a liability. The woman in the stairwell was a stranger to her, a ghost she kept locked away. Her world was one of great wealth, but it was emotionally bankrupt. She had a sprawling terrace garden, but she didn't know the names of the flowers. She had a chef's kitchen, but she subsisted on catered meals and protein bars. She had everything a person could want, and nothing a person truly needed. The brief, unexpected kindness from the building superintendent had been a crack in the facade, a tiny fissure through which a dangerous light was beginning to seep. It illuminated the vast, echoing emptiness of the life she had so carefully constructed. The crisis arrived, as they often do, on a Tuesday. Naomi was preparing for the annual shareholders' gala, a command performance where she had to radiate confidence and success. Her longtime nanny, a woman who was more of a scheduler than a caregiver in Naomi's child-free life, had a family emergency. Every elite babysitting service in the city was booked solid. It wasn't about childcare, it was about optics. She was hosting the event. She had to be there from the first cocktail to the last departing car. A knot of panic, horribly familiar, tightened in her stomach. She was in the lobby, phone pressed to her ear, her voice clipped and professional as she was rejected by a third service. Elias was at the front desk, signing for a delivery. He overheard her end of the conversation, the controlled desperation in her tone. He saw the flicker of that same vulnerability he'd seen in the stairwell. He hesitated for only a moment. His world and hers were meant to run on parallel tracks, never intersecting. But his daughter's voice echoed in his mind, a line from a storybook they'd read last night. "A neighbor is someone who helps." He cleared his throat softly. "Ms. Vance?" Naomi turned, her mask of composure firmly in place. "Mr. Cole, I apologize for overhearing," he began, his gaze direct and respectful. "But if you're in a bind, my usual sitter, Maya, is wonderful. She's a high school senior, lives just a few blocks away. She's been watching Amara since she was a baby. I trust her completely." Naomi stared at him. The suggestion was absurd. A neighborhood teenager for a Vance event? Her protocol demanded a bonded, insured professional with a 10-page resume. But the desperation was a rising tide. I appreciate the offer, but I require someone with extensive references and background checks." "Of course," he said, nodding, not offended. He started to turn away. "Wait," Naomi said, the word escaping before she could stop it. "This Maya, is she available tonight?" An hour later, Maya, a bright-eyed 17-year-old with a warm smile, was standing in Naomi's cavernous living room, looking more intimidated by the decor than by the job. Elias had walked her over himself, a silent, reassuring presence. Naomi gave Maya a list of emergency numbers that was longer than a grocery receipt and a tour of an apartment that had no toys, no snacks, and no soul. It was a strange, sterile environment for a babysitter. Maya's only job, it seemed, was to exist in the space, a human security deposit, while Naomi was out. The gala was a blur of air kisses, meaningless conversations, and champagne that tasted like ash. Naomi moved through the gilded ballroom on autopilot, her mind elsewhere. She kept picturing the warmth in Elias's apartment, the sound of Amara's laughter that sometimes drifted into the hallway. She thought of the simple offer of help, given without expectation of reward. She left the event the second it was professionally acceptable, her driver speeding through the city streets. When she returned, the penthouse was quiet. Maya was on the sofa, reading a textbook. "Everything was fine, Ms. Vance. You have a beautiful home." Naomi paid her, adding a generous tip, and saw her to the door. She felt a profound sense of relief, though nothing had actually happened. Later, as she was preparing for bed, her phone buzzed. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize. It was Maya. "Ms. Vance, sorry to bother you so late. You need to hear what she said when you left." Beneath the text was a voice note. Naomi's finger hovered over the play button. What could a child possibly have to say? She pressed play. The voice that filled the silent room was small, clear, and full of breathless sincerity. It was Amara. Elias must have brought her along when he introduced Maya. "Maya? Is she coming back? The tall lady? She looks like my daddy when he misses Mama. All shiny on the outside but sad in her eyes. She looks like someone who needs a family." Naomi sank onto the edge of her bed, the phone slipping from her fingers. The words, so innocent, so perceptive, landed like a physical blow. A child, a stranger's child, had looked at her and seen past the suit, past the title, past the fortress she had spent a lifetime building. She had seen the truth, sad in her eyes, someone who needs a family. A sob tore from Naomi's throat, a raw, ragged sound she didn't recognize as her own. In the opulent silence of her penthouse, surrounded by all the trappings of success, the Iron Vance finally completely shattered. The next day, Naomi did something she hadn't done in 15 years. She deviated from her schedule. She walked into a toy store, a place as foreign to her as a distant planet, and bought the most extravagant art set she could find. It felt like a clumsy apology, a transactional offering for the emotional grenade Amara had so innocently lobbed into her life. She walked down to Elias's apartment, the brightly wrapped box feeling foolishly large in her hands. She knocked, and the door was opened by Amara herself. The little girl's hair was in two neat buns, and she was wearing a bright yellow dress. Her eyes lit up when she saw Naomi. "Hi, tall lady. You came back." Elias appeared behind her, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He looked surprised to see her. "Ms. Vance, is everything all right?" "Please, call me Naomi," she said, her voice softer than usual. "And this is for Amara. A thank you." She knelt and offered the box to the little girl. Amara's gasp was pure joy. She tore the paper off, revealing a wooden case filled with paints, pastels, and colored pencils of every imaginable shade. "Wow! Look, Daddy, it's a rainbow box." Elias's expression was complicated. There was gratitude, but also a hint of caution. "You didn't have to do that, Ms. Naomi. It's too much." "She did a very big thing for me," Naomi said, her gaze meeting his. "She reminded me of something I'd forgotten." That gift became a bridge. A few days later, a pipe under Naomi's imported Italian marble sink burst, flooding her master bathroom. She called the emergency line, and it was Elias who responded, his toolbox in hand. Amara trailed behind him, clutching a coloring book and her new box of pencils. While Elias worked, his movements efficient and sure, Amara settled on the floor of Naomi's vast, silent living room. "It's so quiet in here," Amara announced to the room at large. She looked up at Naomi, who was standing awkwardly by the window. "Don't you get lonely?" The question, blunt and honest, hung in the air. "Sometimes," Naomi admitted, the truth a strange taste in her mouth. "My daddy gets lonely sometimes too," Amara confided, her pencil scratching against the paper. "That's when we make pancake forts and watch movies about space. Do you like space?" The slow burn bonding began in earnest, a series of small, unplanned moments that chipped away at the walls between their worlds. Naomi started finding excuses to visit the ground floor. She'd bring down leftovers from her catered meals, gourmet dishes that felt absurd in the context of Elias's cozy kitchen. He, in turn, would insist she stay and share a plate of his own simple cooking, stew or pasta, with a sauce that had simmered for hours. One Saturday morning, drawn by the smell of cinnamon, she found them making pancakes. Amara, covered in flour, was stirring the batter with intense concentration. "We're making silly-face pancakes," Amara explained. "Mine has a blueberry eye and a banana mouth." Elias looked at Naomi, a dusting of flour on his cheek. "There's extra batter." And so the CEO of Vance Global found herself sitting at a small kitchen table, eating a slightly burnt pancake shaped vaguely like a lopsided smiley face. It was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. She laughed, a real, uninhibited sound that surprised even herself. She sat on the floor with Amara, the expensive fabric of her silk blouse wrinkling as they colored in pages of butterflies and astronauts. She learned that Amara's favorite color was sunshine yellow, that she believed her mother was now a star, the brightest one in the sky, and that she wanted to be a bug doctor when she grew up. Elias watched these interactions with a quiet, observant warmth. He saw the tension leaving Naomi's shoulders, the guarded look in her eyes softening into something new. He saw the woman beneath the title. He began to talk to her, not as a resident, but as a person. He spoke of his late wife, Sarah, not with sorrow, but with a gentle reverence. He described her laugh, the way she'd hum gospel hymns while she cooked, how she had believed kindness was a form of magic. "Amara has her spirit," he said one evening, as they sat on the small patio behind his apartment, watching Amara chase fireflies in the twilight. "This relentless belief in the good of things. I see Sarah in her every day." Moved by his unguarded vulnerability, Naomi found herself sharing a piece of her own story. She spoke of the immense pressure of her father's legacy, of a childhood spent in boardrooms instead of playgrounds. She told him about her failed engagement, how her ex-fiancé had announced their impending marriage at a press conference before he'd even properly proposed to her, framing it as a merger of two powerful families. "I was an asset," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "A valuable acquisition. I don't think he ever really saw me." "I see you," Elias said, the words simple, direct, and devastating. He wasn't looking at her suit or her expensive watch. He was looking into her eyes, and for the first time in years, she felt what it meant to belong. She felt seen. Not for her status, not for her achievements, but for the quiet, yearning soul she kept hidden from the world. The connection between them deepened, an unspoken tenderness that grew in the fertile ground of shared wounds and imperfect pancakes. It was a fragile, beautiful thing, and it was about to be threatened by the cold, cynical world she had tried so hard to conquer. The world Naomi had mastered was one of sharp elbows and quiet betrayals. At Vance Global, a colleague named Mark Renshaw had been circling her position for months. He was a man who saw business as a zero-sum game, and he viewed Naomi's compassion as a weakness to be exploited. He saw the subtle changes in her, the slight softening of her demeanor, the way she now left the office at a reasonable hour, and smelled blood in the water. He hired a private investigator, convinced there was a scandal he could use to his advantage. The investigator didn't have to dig deep. He simply observed. He photographed Naomi leaving Elias's ground floor apartment late one evening after sharing a quiet dinner. He captured images of her laughing as she pushed Amara on a swing at a nearby park on a Sunday afternoon. He documented her buying groceries, not from the high-end delivery service she usually used, but from the local market, with a list Amara had helped her write in crayon. Mark compiled the photos into a neat, damning file. In his hands, these moments of simple human connection were twisted into something sordid and unprofessional. CEO's inappropriate relationship with building staff, erratic behavior, and compromised judgment. The narrative was clear. The Iron Vance was cracking, becoming unstable, and her dalliance with a working-class man was proof that she was no longer fit to lead. He planned to present his findings at the upcoming quarterly board meeting, a carefully orchestrated coup designed to oust her and seize the throne for himself. Naomi knew something was wrong. The whispers in the hallways grew louder. Colleagues who once met her gaze with respect now looked away. Mark's solicitous inquiries about her well-being were laced with a triumphant poison. The pressure mounted, the old anxieties creeping back in. The world she was trying to build with Elias and Amara felt a million miles away from the corporate battlefield she had to navigate every day. One evening, Elias found her sitting on a bench in the building's small communal garden. She was staring at her phone, her face pale, her armor firmly back in place. He had just put Amara to bed and had come out for a breath of fresh air. He sat beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. "You're 1,000 miles away," he said softly. She didn't look at him. "They're trying to take the company from me, Elias." She explained the situation in clipped, precise sentences, devoid of emotion. She told him about Mark, about the whispers, about the photos she suspected existed. "They're using you. They're using my friendship with you and Amara as a weapon against me." He listened, his expression unreadable. When she was finished, he was silent for a long time. "What they think," he said finally, his voice a low, steady anchor in her storm, "doesn't change what is true. What's true is the time we've spent, the pancakes, the conversations, the way Amara's face lights up when she sees you." He turned to look at her, his eyes searching hers in the dim light. "They can't take that. That's real. The rest is just noise." "It's my life's work, Elias," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "It's all I've ever been." "Is it?" he asked gently. "Is it all you want to be?" The question hung between them, more challenging than any her father had ever asked. It wasn't about performance or profit margins. It was about her soul. She went back to her penthouse that night and looked around at the cold, beautiful emptiness. For the first time, she didn't see a symbol of her success. She saw a cage, a beautiful, gilded cage she had built for herself, and she knew with a quiet, terrifying certainty that she had to choose. She could fight for the cage, or she could fight for the chance to be free. The boardroom was a theater of silent warfare. The long, polished mahogany table reflected the grim faces of the board members like a dark mirror. Naomi sat at the head of the table, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. Her suit was impeccable, her natural hair pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. She was the image of the Iron Vance, the leader they had all come to know. Mark Renshaw began his presentation. He spoke of shareholder value, of market stability, of the need for unwavering leadership. His voice was smooth, laced with false concern. Then, he projected the photos onto the large screen at the end of the room. A blurry shot of Naomi laughing in the park with Amara. A long lens photo of her at the door of Elias's apartment. Each image was presented as evidence of a great and troubling lapse in judgment. "It is with a heavy heart," Mark said, his voice dripping with insincerity, "that I must raise concerns about Ms. Vance's current fitness to lead. Her personal associations are becoming a liability." The board members shifted uncomfortably. They looked at Naomi, expecting a fierce denial, a counterattack, the corporate bloodshed they were used to. Naomi let the silence stretch. She looked at the photos on the screen. She didn't see a scandal. She saw moments of grace. She saw the first real joy she had felt in decades. She rose to her feet. She did not look at Mark. She addressed the board, her voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the room. "Mr. Renshaw is correct," she began, and a collective gasp went through the room. My judgment has been compromised recently. For my entire life, I have judged my own worth by the metrics on your spreadsheets, by stock prices and quarterly reports. I equated value with profit and success with sacrifice. I was wrong. She walked slowly around the table, her gaze meeting each board member's. These photos do not show a lapse in judgment. They show the beginning of it. They show a woman learning that a child's laughter is worth more than a market rally. They show a woman discovering that kindness is a currency that never devalues. She paused in front of the window, looking out at the city she had sought to conquer. The man in these photos is Elias Cole. He is the superintendent of my building. He is a good and honorable man. He is the most devoted father I have ever met. He is my friend. She said the word friend as if it were a sacred vow. You are worried about my association with a working-class man. You see it as a stain on the Vance Global brand, but I have learned more about integrity and strength from watching him fix a leaky pipe and braid his daughter's hair than I have in 1,000 of these meetings. She turned back to face them, and for the first time the board saw not the Iron Vance, but Naomi. Her eyes were clear and bright. The sadness was gone. You want a CEO who will sacrifice everything for this company. I used to be that person. I am not anymore. I have found something real, something that cannot be quantified in a report, and I will not sacrifice it. Not for you, not for my father, not for this company. She walked back to her seat, picked up a single sheet of paper, and placed it on the table. Therefore, I tender my resignation as CEO of Vance Global, effective immediately. You can have the title, Mr. Renshaw. I wish you joy of it. She turned and walked out of the boardroom, not looking back. She didn't feel loss. She didn't feel anger. She felt the exhilarating, terrifying lightness of being free. She had walked away from power, from status, from the only identity she had ever known. And she was walking toward home. She didn't take the elevator to the penthouse. She went straight to the ground floor, to Elias's apartment. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a wild, joyful rhythm. What if she had misread everything? What if his kindness was just that? Kindness, not something more. The fear was real. But for the first time in her life, she was willing to be vulnerable, to risk everything for a chance at happiness. She knocked. The door opened, and he was there. He must have heard the news. It would have spread through the building like wildfire. His face was a mask of concern, and something else, something deeper. He didn't say a word. He just stepped aside and held the door open for her. She stepped inside, into the warm, fragrant air of his home. The scent of cinnamon and coffee hung in the air. Crayon drawings were taped to the refrigerator. It was the most beautiful place she had ever seen. From the living room, a small voice called out, "Is that Naomi?" Amara came running into the hallway, her face alight with a brilliant smile. She launched herself at Naomi, wrapping her small arms around her legs in a fierce hug. Naomi's hands came down to rest on the child's head, on the soft puffs of her natural hair. Amara looked up, her bright eyes searching Naomi's. "Does that mean you're staying forever?" Tears welled in Naomi's eyes, tears of joy this time, of relief, of a profound and overwhelming sense of arrival. She looked over Amara's head at Elias. His own eyes were glistening. He gave a slow, small nod, a confirmation, a promise. "Yes," Naomi whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I think it does." 3 months later, the world looked different. The sunlight that streamed through the windows of Naomi's new office felt warmer. It was a small, rented space in a historically black neighborhood, the headquarters for her new venture, the Sarah Cole Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing grants and mentorship for women of color starting their own businesses. It was named, at Elias's tearful suggestion, after his late wife. Naomi had traded her glass tower for a ground-floor view of a community garden, and she had never felt richer. Elias was there, a screwdriver in his hand, expertly assembling a bookshelf. He still worked at the building. He loved his job. But his evenings and weekends were now intertwined with hers. They were a team, building something new together, both literally and figuratively. Amara sat at a child-sized table in the corner, a gift from Naomi, happily drawing with her rainbow box of pencils. The room was filled with the comfortable silence of people who belonged together. Naomi had moved out of the penthouse. She now lived in a modest but sunny apartment a few floors below where she used to reside, a space she was slowly filling with photographs, with comfortable furniture, with life. More often than not, though, the three of them ended up at Elias's apartment, making pancake forts and watching movies about space. Her tailored suits gathered dust in a closet. She now favored soft sweaters and comfortable jeans. Her natural hair, once confined to severe updos, was often left down, a cloud of beautiful coils framing her face. She was no longer a monument. She was a woman. Elias finished the bookshelf and wiped his hands on his jeans. He walked over to Amara's table and picked up her latest creation. He smiled, a soft, private smile, and walked over to Naomi, who was typing at her laptop. "I think you need to see this," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't quite place. He handed her the drawing. It was a child's masterpiece. 3 stick figures stood under a giant, smiling yellow sun. On the left was a tall figure with short hair, labeled Daddy in wobbly letters. In the middle was a smaller figure with 2 beaded braids that seemed to defy gravity, labeled Amara. And on the right, holding the little girl's hand, was a figure with a cloud of beautiful hair and a wide, happy smile. Beneath it, Amara had written, Naomi. The figures were colored in with care. The artist had used a rich, dark brown crayon for their skin. They were a family, a black man, a black woman, and a little black girl, radiant under a loving sun. It was an innocent declaration, a truth seen through the eyes of a child. Naomi's breath hitched. She looked up at Elias, her eyes shining with tears. He wasn't holding a diamond ring or a velvet box. He was just holding the drawing, his dark, calloused hand trembling slightly. "Is this," he started, his voice breaking, "is this what you want, Naomi? For us to be this?" She didn't need words. She simply reached out, her hand covering his over the drawing. A silent affirmation. She nodded, the tears finally spilling over, tracing paths of pure joy down her cheeks. "It's all I've ever wanted," she whispered. "I just didn't know how to find it." He leaned in and kissed her, a gentle, tender kiss that held the promise of 1,000 pancake breakfasts, of a lifetime of quiet evenings and shared burdens. It was a kiss that tasted like home. And so, in the heart of a bustling city, a new family was built. It wasn't built on contracts or mergers, but on the sturdy foundation of reflexive kindness. It was a family born in a sterile stairwell, nurtured in a warm kitchen, and solidified by a child's crayon drawing. For love, the truest and most lasting kind, is not something you earn or achieve. It is not found in the penthouse suites of life. It is found in the quiet moments, in the shared vulnerabilities, in the profound courage it takes to let yourself be truly, completely seen. It is the simple, sacred act of offering someone water in the desert of their loneliness, and choosing, every day after, to stay.